Welcome everyone to AER Live, our series of online interactive workshops from Applied Ecology Resources. My name is Min, I'm the assistant editor at AER. I would have been the one emailing you with all these joining details, and I'm delighted you have all joined us today for our first workshop of 2022. AER is a free open access resource for everyone to use, but if your organization produces reports, case studies and other great literature themselves, do consider getting in touch with us about AER membership. Membership can help raise the profile of your organization by showcasing your work to a global community, support your capacity building strategy, demonstrate the value of the information you generate, and allow you to easily share this information. Membership is available in different tiers, suited for different types of organizations, and you can find out more by visiting appliedecologyresources.org/membership. At the heart of AER is our open access journal, Ecological Solutions and Evidence. As well as research articles, we have bespoke article types such as practice insights that enable ecological practitioners to easily share their key findings and observations from experience, whether it's a case study, protocol, or a more communicative piece calling for new approaches. Today's workshop speakers are also authors of a recently published practice insights article. If you feel like you or your project collaborators have something to share with the community, especially following today's workshop, please visit bit.ly/practice-insights to find out more. I will shortly hand over to our speakers for today's workshop, but before I do, here are a few housekeeping rules. The workshop will be recorded and posted online, so please keep your camera and audio off at all times unless asked otherwise. Please send in any questions or comments via the Zoom chat, and we will share some of these during the workshop. So without waiting any longer, let me introduce Caleb Roberts, TJ Walker, and Dillon Fogarty for their workshop, Restoring Large-Scale Grasslands with Fire and Cultural Willpower. And I'll hand it over to you, Caleb.
Thanks, Min. Okay, yeah, thanks for joining us today. My name is Caleb Roberts, like Min said. I'm an assistant unit leader at the Arkansas Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. So I'm an employee of the U.S. Geological Survey. I will introduce TJ and Dillon a little bit later on, but here the way this is going to go is I'm going to sort of introduce the topic and the location and some of the science behind what we did, especially for that paper that Min mentioned. And then we're going to have a more interactive time with TJ and Dillon, who are the sort of location, place-based practitioner experts for this topic. And I'm going to ask them some questions, and they're going to kind of just talk about the questions that I'm asking them. And then that'll feed into the Q&A at the end of the session. So to start us off, this is a photograph that I took from the Loess Canyons in Nebraska in the USA. This is a prescribed burn. It's not a wildfire. And these people out here are the ones tending it. So it may look kind of crazy or out of control, but they totally have it in control and they know exactly what they're doing. And what they're doing is restoring grasslands with fire. So to kind of set you up why we are talking about that, the fact of the matter is that grasslands are the most imperiled and least protected terrestrial biome on the planet. So this image here is from a recent paper from Reinhard Schultz et al. In Conservation Science and Practice, and it just shows you the extent of the grasslands on the planet and how imperiled most of them are, right? So there's not a lot of green, which would be the intact ones, and there's a lot of red and orange. And the Great Plains of North America, where our study and work is set, is no exception, right? So most of them have been converted, or at least the eastern parts, to row crop agriculture, or they've been urbanized. And another huge problem is woody plant encroachment, which is affecting not just the Great Plains, but many parts of the world, many savannas and grasslands. And to kind of give you a sneak peek or hint of the consequences of this loss of grasslands, this is a figure from a very notorious, famous, but notorious as in it's very depressing paper from Rosenberg et al. 2019 in Science. So what they did was they took the breeding bird survey in North America, and they looked at the abundance of all the birds in North America, unfortunately excluding Mexico because there's no data there. And they saw that, yeah, between 1970 and 2019, 3 billion birds have been lost. So that's a sort of crazy figure, right? But they also broke it up into ecoregions and guilds. So you can see that in the B and C panels. And especially, I'll draw your attention to in the C panel, this grassland guild, right? So and the grassland birds are the ones that have lost the most individual birds, the most abundance of birds by a huge margin out of all the guilds in North America, right? And as I said, there are many culprits to this, row crop agriculture, urbanization, but the one we're going to focus on today is woody plant encroachment. And these maps that I put up down here on the bottom are from 1990 and 2019, and what they're showing is using satellite imagery and some new tree cover and grass cover data. They're showing basically the boundary between where woody plants were expanded in 1990 up to where they are, or they were in 2019. So the green is kind of intact grassland and the red is encroached woody area. And as you can see, it's really moved a long ways away, right? It's really moved farther west. It's a crazy problem. And just to, if you don't really believe, you know, some satellite imagery at such a large scale, this is an actual aerial photo of the Loess Canyons from 1994 and 2014, where you can see just in the span of, you know, 20-ish years, these grasslands have been quickly displaced by trees. And every acre, every hectare of grassland lost is a lot, as you know, many grassland birds lost too, because they just cannot stand, most of them cannot stand trees at all. So setting up that problem, enter in the solution to it. So in 2002, the folks in the Loess Canyons saw the extent of this problem and they wanted to do something about it. And there was a coalition formed of private landowners, ranchers out there, universities, natural resource agencies, and NGOs to combat this woody plant encroachment problem. And this coalition was led by private landowners, these prescribed burn associations, and they really kind of had at the problem, and they have been burning and getting better and been burning more and restoring more and more grasslands as they go on. So this is the same sort of image I showed you from the Great Plains Y perspective. I know the colors are different, but anywhere in blue is intact grasslands. I should say that this is a map of the Loess Canyons of Nebraska. And anywhere in red and orange are encroached woodlands, right? So this is the extent of the issue in 2000. And that's just showing you where the woodlands and grasslands more or less are. And as you can see, over time, the woodlands quickly encroached through much of the Loess Canyons, right? So this is where it sort of peaked in 2010. But you can see that over time, something's been happening, right? There's been a recession, or this tree invasion has been pushed back. And that coalition that I mentioned was the source of it. So what's going on here is all these black polygons that I'm showing you right now are the actual fire perimeters of these prescribed burns that they put out on the landscape. They burn an enormous amount of land every year. The average is about 3,100 hectares a year. And that means about 3 to 4% of the Loess Canyons per year. And I know this says acres for the international audience, that the Loess Canyons is about 136,000 hectares. And yeah, they're literally using these fires to punch holes in the encroaching trees, right? So that in itself, just looking at it like that is a huge win. And I'll just pause here to also say the reason that they're doing this is that these people are as I said, this is led by private landowners who are ranchers. So their bread and butter, their livelihoods are based off the fact that they need grass for their cattle to feed on, right? So The species that are invading out here, as you can see in that sort of top left picture, are juniper species, and they completely shade out grass. So it just completely makes for no grass for these cattle to eat, and cuts into the livelihoods of these folks. So that's sort of the impetus of why they were doing it. And of course, all the conservation groups were doing it for the conservation of the system region. So what are the outcomes besides the fact that they were literally like pushing these trees backwards, right? Which is an enormous accomplishment in itself. Well, the paper that we have in Ecological Solutions and Evidence is one of the biggest outcomes that we have seen as far as the wildlife. So we show in our paper, of which TJ and Dillon are co-authors, that the fires in the Loess Canyons have caused the grassland bird diversity to increase across 65% or 90,000 hectares of the Loess Canyons. That's an enormous feat, given the fact that grassland birds are declining across their entire range in North America. They have managed to, in this enormous landscape, to cause grassland birds to come back over most of it, right? And so these two panels are just showing on the left how much they've decreased the tree cover from their burns and under the black polygon. So the more red it is, the more loss of tree cover from the fires. And then in the B panel, it's showing the increase in grassland bird diversity as it gets more blue. And you can see that the most blue, the darkest blue, are under the fire perimeters. So that's a huge accomplishment. And that's been published. This right here is another really exciting thing that we're working on writing up and getting published right now. But I wanted to show you a little preview of it. So the American burying beetle, for those who don't know, is a threatened species of carrion beetle. And it used to cover pretty much most of the eastern United States. But it has been extirpated from an enormous amount of its range until there's pretty much only 2 or 3 bastions of it left, one of which is in the Loess Canyons. And through these fires, during all this restoration happening, we found that American burying beetle abundance increased by 55%. So all these dots down here are the relative abundances of the burying beetle. And you can see in 2007, when they started the surveys, versus 2019, the burying beetle have increased by an enormous amount. And the where they're increasing the most are where all the fires are happening. So this is work led by a master's student in Nebraska, and we're excited to have that come out soon. And finally, before I move on to Dillon and TJ, I just want to say that this Loess Canyons restoration, what work they're doing is garnering international attention, right? So this is an international workshop. But aside from that, National Geographic, Discovery Magazine, the national website, farmers.gov in the US, those are all covering what's going on in the Loess Canyons. So this is a huge thing. And we have so much to learn from these folks that are doing it. And to begin that learning, I'd love to have TJ and Dillon turn on their cameras. And yeah, we can start our Q&A session. So I'll introduce these two. TJ Walker is an employee of the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. And he has been with this coalition of private landowners and natural resource agencies at the Loess Canyons pretty much since the beginning. And TJ, we'll ask you all kinds of questions about that, TJ. And then Dillon Fogarty is the Working Lands Program Coordinator from the University of Nebraska. So he works with a lot of these people in the Loess Canyons and throughout the Great Plains to conserve and restore grasslands. So thanks for joining, Dillon and TJ. And yeah, let me get some questions pulled up so we can start asking you. Okay, so I'll kind of throw this one out to both of you guys. I've touched on 3 restoration outcomes: literally reclaiming grasslands from the trees, increases in threatened American burying beetle abundance, and increases in grassland bird diversity. So from your perspective, what are some other restoration outcomes in terms of wildlife or societal or economic benefits that we should talk about today?
I can start a little bit. So thanks for having me. The first thing I'd hit on is the restoration of grazing lands. So they've been able to restore herbaceous production their properties and to the broader landscape. And that's the remarkable part is, you know, we've got a community of ranchers and natural resource professionals working together. This is an example where we have production goals for livestock and wildlife benefit at the same time. So it really is a win-win for everybody, and it's helping keep grasslands on the landscape. TJ?
Yeah, as far as other wildlife go, I mean, that area supports a healthy population of mule deer, white-tailed deer, turkey, even a herd of elk. So there's actually a lot of game species benefits as well, including northern bobwhite. There's even prairie chickens on the southern edge of the canyons there. Landowners in Nebraska really like pheasants. They're actually starting to see a few pheasants out in the middle of the canyons that they hadn't seen in decades. So some of them are pretty excited about that. Obviously the grassland songbirds, you know, just a wide variety of wildlife that we're seeing good results for and benefits for. As far as the societal, really a strong cultural commitment here, and they've really formed, you know, it's one big team, one big family in that area. You know, that's a huge benefit for the ranchers there. And you also, you know, you brought up the American burying beetles. When we first started working out there in like 2004 was the first project we did with a landowner out there. Most landowners were either afraid of or apathetic to our Endangered Species Act and the American burying beetle. And now there's actually pretty good, almost universal acceptance of that species, and even some pride in having it on their land. And that's really been an amazing part of this.
Yeah, there's some things I'll have to touch back on with that, TJ, but to keep on with what you were saying a little bit. So you've been working with these folks since the beginning of this effort. Can you just tell us a little bit of the history of how it formed?
Yeah, early on, a man named Doug Wisenhunt was working with Nature Conservancy, and he saw the cedars in the canyons, and he kind of started gathering the landowners up and getting them together, talking to them about it. And he was actually the one that encouraged the alliance, the landowner cooperative. They got started, they were doing a few small scale burns, things like that. In 2004, we started putting together our state wildlife action plan, which is a required thing in the United States for each state to have. Ours is called the Nebraska Natural Legacy Project. And when we were working on that, we identified this canyons area as an intact grassland landscape that we wanted to work on and protect. So we started working with the landowners. The United States Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service was also starting to work with them at that time. We worked with Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever to get a biologist position in place and start working with those landowners directly. We kind of all started with different but slightly overlapping visions of where we thought the canyons should go, how things should go in the canyons. And I'd say over a period of about 4 or 5 years, those slightly overlapping visions merged into one unified vision. It was, great partnerships, great communication with the landowners, great buy-in by the landowners, a lot of trust and faith. That's really, the success of that area is the landowners, without a doubt. But the different conservation groups and organizations coming together and working with those landowners to form that shared vision is definitely how we've gotten to where we are today.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. So what you're saying is that there was initially Doug Wisenhunt, which at the time, was he working for the NRCS or was he working for the Conservancy?
He was with Nature Conservancy at the start of it, and then he later transitioned to NRCS.
Okay. Yeah. So this sort of outside person helped instigate it, but then you're saying that the landowners kind of took it up and ran with it after that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's so cool. So Dylan, I'll shift it over to you. We're talking about the fire out here, and fire can of course be something that's pretty alarming to many people. I know that when I was out there, the flame lengths and the heat and intensity of it was, humbling, and it wasn't a way frightening, but like in a very exciting way, and of how effective this treatment was. But so they're using these Loess Canyon folks are using fire in a very unique way as far as the intensity and the size of it. What makes it so special, and why are they using it like that?
Yeah, so little bit of background. Great Plains is a fire dependent or a fire dependent ecosystem. Eastern red cedar, the species that's kind of leading this biome scale transition, is a fire sensitive species. It's really good at hanging on as a rare species, but with fire suppression, it's become a lot of people would say invasive, and it's encroaching into the grasslands. And so what they've been able to do in the Loess Canyons is restore fire at a large scale. Not only that, they've been able to target higher fire intensities to surpass fire mortality thresholds of juniper trees. So I probably referred to it as Eastern red cedar. It's a juniper species. There's one juniper species or the other encroaching throughout the entire Western US. They're actually able to target higher fire intensities to cause mortality, these big mature trees. One of the things they can do is they target fuel loads. So they'll go out and they'll cut isolated juniper trees down, and they'll stuff them underneath the canopies of patches or really large trees, allow that herbaceous fuel to build back up where they cut. And then when that prescribed fire comes through, it has that additional fuel load at the perimeters to induce mortality. And that allows them to target wind and moisture conditions that are reasonable by adding that extra fuel load. But so it's really, they're able to target that higher intensity. There's a recent paper out in 2022 led by Reinhard Schultz. Something I contributed to it. It's high intensity fires for managing woody encroachment, lessons learned from the US and South Africa. But the paper pulls together these different examples, including the Loess Canyons, and how they've been able to use these higher intensity fires specifically to control shrub encroachment. Yeah,
that's really cool. Yeah, I'll thanks, Dylan. I'll say that Reinhard Schultz was actually a co-author on our paper with DJ and Dylan and me, and he is from South Africa. So if y'all have a chance, you should read some of his work. He's got some really cool insights, and that new paper sounds really neat. So, okay, so TJ, we were just talking about these large scale, high intensity fires. Sorry, I'm skipping my questions here. Okay, so this all occurred on private properties. How typical is this level of cooperation that you've seen in your work, and are there similar efforts underway in different parts of Nebraska or different parts of the Great Plains?
Well, typical would definitely not be a description of the group in the canyons for sure. They've had literally over 100 people show up to assist on one burn. They've done burns over 3,500 acres in one fire, one unit. The demand for burns increased over the years, and there's actually now 2 associations that are working in the Loess Canyons area, the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance and the Central Platte Rangeland Alliance. And those were, people that were all involved in the main group at the beginning. And then they split into 2 groups, got more equipment, got more members, coming to the burns. In, I think it was 2020, they actually burned over 30,000 acres, which has kind of been our benchmark for that area, which is 10% of the grassland in that area. So they actually achieved that in 2020. That's the only year they did that so far, but they're continuing to do well. There are other prescribed burn associations in Nebraska. In fact, I think there's like 13 or maybe even 15 other burn associations, but they're much smaller groups. They tend to focus on things like CRP or small blocks of rangeland, not these large scale burns.
Okay, yeah, great. For Dillon, since you're working with a lot of the, I guess more of the Great Plains writ large, can you think of any other examples that would be similar to Loess Canyons? And also, can you just speak a little bit to, what a few of these maybe acronyms are, or maybe just talk about what the private prescribed burn associations are, and then maybe what rangelands are, just so we know what the definition is.
Yeah, so prescribed burn associations have popped up across the Great Plains, and they've kind of followed this wave of woody encroachment. And what they are is they tend to be landowner-led groups. It's communities of practice for using prescribed fire. And they tend to center around restoration from encroachment by woody plants. So there's groups in Kansas we've worked with. And I know there's additional groups in Texas, and we see the same sort of community developing among neighbors and it's around using fire to control woody plants, to restore productivity, wildlife, all the benefits of using prescribed fire. And so we are seeing that. The Loess Canyons is unique in several ways. I mean, we have the ownership in the Loess Canyons is unique in that they own nearly a contiguous area of land where there's burn units that have single burns that might have 8 property owners involved on that single burn. So seeing that level of cooperation where one burn touches 8 properties is really remarkable and unique to the Loess Canyon. So we're seeing communities around restoration and use of fire, but they're all going to be unique in their own aspects.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dillon. And I'll just say that if we don't know what rangelands are, that they're just grazing lands, usually sort of grasslands or savannas that like in our context what ranchers will use. So Dillon and TJ, I'll sort of throw this out to both of you guys. In the title of this workshop, we use the term cultural willpower. I know that's a term you at least in the University of Nebraska, and maybe you, TJ, are thinking about and use sometimes. So could you define it a little bit better and describe how it manifests, and maybe describe how it applies to Loess Canyons restoration?
Why don't you take a crack at that one first, TJ?
All right. Well, I kind of alluded to this. I kind of alluded to this earlier. The landowners in the Loess Canyons are a perfect example of this cultural will or cultural willpower. They have literally become a community of, pro-fire, pro-rangeland, pro-grassland landowners that are all working together to make this happen and make this work. And that's huge when it comes to grasslands, especially in a state like Nebraska, where 97% of the land is privately owned. Folks like myself and people that work for me, with me, around me, we only really control 3% of the land on public land. And if we're wanting to try to manage for things like prairie grouse, like greater prairie chickens or sharp-tailed grouse, mule deer, pronghorn, antelope, things like that have large habitat areas, large ranges, we have no chance in doing that on our public lands. So that cultural will in these grassland areas is insanely important. I mean, it's literally impossible for us to do large scale conservation without that. And we have this new Great Plains Grassland Initiative coming up as a result of a lot of this stuff that we've collectively been working on, which is very exciting. And that's one of the key things we're looking for in that Great Plains Grassland Initiative, is where we have landowners that are willing to step up, be leaders, form communities, and truly work together to make sure that they can get cedars under control, conduct fire, things like that.
Yeah, I'd just reiterate TJ's answer. He said earlier in a comment, he said, the landowners are the number one thing. They are what makes this work. And so without landowners who are willing to start a fire on their property,
and their neighbors willing to be there to help them.
Yes, and their neighbors willing there to help. I mean, just having the willpower to want to do something on your property and beyond. I mean, crossing the street and talking to your neighbor is such a big deal. And so that's something that's unique to the Loess Canyons, and it's something that is a key ingredient in scaling up conservation on these private lands. Like TJ said, we have 97% private lands. Without landowners, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's impressive, and it's really an encouraging thing when you hear so many negative stories or losses. This is such a light in the midst of all that. So, okay, Dillon, since you were the last one to speak, I'll target you. Why are the Loess Canyons folks using fire for restoration? We kind of touched on that a little bit, but maybe we'll focus on the last end of this question. Are there other methods that would work just as well as fire?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, they've been developing methods to combat woody plants and grasslands for over 100 years. Fire is the natural enemy to trees in the Great Plains. Like I said, junipers are fire sensitive species. So what fire does is it can remove the seeds, the seedlings, the saplings, the mature trees, the patches of trees, the woodlands, the forests. All these other tools we've developed to control woody plants targets 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 4 of those. So nothing can consume the seeds. We have chemicals that can control seedlings. We have hand tools that can control small trees. We have heavy equipment, bulldozers, etc. Forestry equipment that can control the woodlands, the really large trees. But to get that control that you can get with fire is you're stringing together a whole bunch of tools, and the cost is dramatically different. So we're talking hundreds of dollars per acre for heavy equipment, mechanical removal, even thousands of dollars an acre in some steep slopes, heavy infested areas. Prescribed fire, we're talking dollars to tens of dollars per acre for application, and it consumes all those different life stages of the encroachment cycle. So and most people will tell you they didn't start with prescribed fire. They struggled and learned the hard way that if they're going to spend this much time and effort managing it, they need to be using prescribed fire. Otherwise, it's just such an uphill battle using all this other suite of tools to do what a prescribed fire can do relatively simply.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thanks, Dillon. That's really useful to know, given when all the news things you see about fire, and people might have questions about that. So thanks for sharing that. I meant to say this at the beginning, but these lands that the Loess Canyons folks are on were originally managed by several tribes: the Oglala, the Pawnee, the Cheyenne, and those were the ones that sort of made the grasslands originally. And I feel like in a lot of ways, what we're doing is just sort of relearning what they sort of already knew, because they were the ones that originally put enormous fires on these landscapes and made them grasslands. So I think that it's worthwhile to acknowledge that. So one last question before we move into sort of the Q&A with everybody else. And I'll throw this out to both of y'all, Dillon and TJ. What's the overall strategy behind the timing and the placements of these fires? I feel like that in our paper, that's probably one of the key lessons that we learned, and maybe one of the key ingredients for why they're having such success out there.
TJ, I'll let you start with that one. I know you. worked a lot with these folks.
Well, timing is an interesting question, Caleb, because vast majority of fire in Nebraska happens in February, March, April. Spring, it's a time of year where these farmer ranchers are, they have some time to be able to devote to it. It also allows for, the vegetation to green back up, and they may even be able to go in there and graze, following the fire. The timing of burns, however, can vary a lot more than that. They have started doing some fall burns, even over winter burns, and they're going to have to start doing more of those just because of the amount of burning they need to get done. The burning at different times of the year may favor different herbaceous plants. If you burn at certain times of the year, it can favor cool season grasses. For example, you burn at other times of the year, it can favor the warm seasons. Mostly these guys are looking to, looking to do things. They burn in the spring. It frees up that canopy of the grassland, if you will, for the warm season grass growth that they then depend on for their livestock production.
Great, thanks, DJ. Dylan, do you think you can talk about how they place the fires and strategize that part?
Yeah, so I mean, think about that figure Caleb showed that kind of shows the Loess Canyons as a whole, and that wave of woody plants kind of marching down over time. And so the level of intention here is debated. I've heard the landowners say the plan wasn't necessarily to build up a wall as that woody encroachment wave was marching down. Others have said, yeah, that's what we were doing. So, I mean, we're talking over 70 landowners working together. So, but what we see is that they actually kind of, they had their fire treatments were clustered. And over time, they kind of built up a defense barrier that as this wave of woody encroachment was coming down, they were able to kind of halt this advancing front of woody encroachment. And what that did is it protected all the grasslands to the south from this advancing front of woody encroachment. And so, how intentional it was, the landowners will debate, but it was a good strategy, whatever happened, because they were able to halt this spatially advancing transition. And you see benefits to grassland birds in our paper where there's no fire in the grasslands. Areas that would have been a lot more vulnerable to woody encroachment had those fires upstream not had kind of stemmed the tide of encroachment.
One more thing I'd like to add, Caleb, is that this Loess Canyons landscape is very rugged. You look at the placement of the burns, and Dylan's alluded to multi-landowner burns. A lot of that is for safety purposes. They have to follow a ridge or follow a valley or follow a road to use as the burn boundary. And most of our ownership lines follow north, south, east, west, section lines, quarter section lines, things like that. And so those winding, curving roads, those ridges, those valleys all go through multiple landowners, and it just makes it a safer situation when they combine, across landowners to combine to get larger burns, more efficient burns, and safer burns by doing so.
For sure, yeah. And just kind of for reference for everybody, what's this average, land ownerships, like the average property size for some of these ranchers out there?
It varies considerably. This part of the state, there's actually quite a few landowners out there that own, one section or 640 acres. There's others that, may own 8 or 10 sections, I would say, at the most in that area, that landscape. You get to other parts of Nebraska, like the Sandhills of Nebraska, and I mean, there's landowners that literally own 60,000 contiguous acres, in one ranch. So this is a little different system. There is some, crop production in some parts of the canyons as well that, they also get some of their livelihood off of. So mostly relatively small scale land ownership in the Loess Canyons compared to some of the other grassland areas of the state.
Yeah, it's just amazing that that so many people are willing to work together, and really the question for how they do their fires is how safe and effective is it going to be, really, rather than the property lines. That's so cool.
We've had federal firefighters come out and assist and train on landowner driven burns, and the federal firefighters are literally in awe that these landowners are pulling off these burns that they would consider to be, risky and dangerous, and they're doing it with, minimal slop over and no escapes, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's been like no, I mean, from what last thing I heard, right, there's been no injuries. I think there maybe was like an ATV incident once, right? That was it. It wasn't anything to do with the fires.
Correct.
Yeah, it's amazing. After, I mean, what's it been, 20 years now? That's crazy. So, okay, well, let's move into a few of the questions from the folks in the chat. I will scan through these a little bit right here. So I'll kind of go from the earliest to the latest. And if we don't get all of your questions, apologize. We'll just you can try to email us or follow up with us personally later. Okay. So I think the British ecological community, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time reading all the names of these things. So if you have any questions from, or sorry, no, that's not a question. That's just a statement. Okay. There's a question. I'm a PhD student working on grassland communities in Western Ghats, India. We always end up discussing if fire helps increase plant diversity or has the potential to harm or decrease seed viability. So can we maybe just generally talk to that, Dillon or TJ? And I can answer some of these too.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, with fire, we think of seasonality, intensity, frequency, size. So it doesn't become a question of does it increase it or decrease it, because there's so many different ways fire can influence plant diversity and seed viability on the landscape. So I'm sure there could be a design that shows how fire would increase as well as decrease plant diversity depending on how it was used over time. We see in areas that use prescribed fire every single year at the same time, plant diversity decreases over time. But if depending on how you use it, it's going to determine what happens to plant diversity.
For sure.
The intensity of the fire, relative humidity at the time of the fire. I've seen burns that had good intentions, including increasing plant diversity, that were done at a time with low humidity, high intensity fire, and then were followed by drought. And that combination is really, really tough. That actually did result in lower plant diversity initially, although when the rains came back a couple of years later, it did respond favorably. But yeah, I was just going to answer the question with yes, because it can increase plant diversity. And a lot of the burns we do on wildlife areas on our public lands, for example, we'll try to time them in a manner that we know will increase broadleaf plant, wildflowers, those types of things. So it's all about the timing of the burn, and then what Mother Nature gives you after the burn as well.
And those are great answers. I'll add to that and say that, to put it in perspective, when you have so these were all sort of mixed grass prairies historically, at least in the Loess Canyons. And then if you think more broadly in the Great Plains, many types of prairie, right? But when you have juniper species or tree species move in, that plant diversity that was out there goes to pretty much zero. And there's many papers that show that. So by having these fires and killing these trees, plant diversity increases, or by orders of magnitude. It's like from 0 to, whatever, hundreds of percent. It's pretty amazing stuff. It's kind of hard to describe because it's like you're talking about 0 to 100 kind of situation. Okay, so another question. I think we answered this one a little bit, but it might bear repeating. Did prescribed burning start out with an experimental design or framework in mind, or has that just been bolted on afterwards? I
mean, it started out to restore grasslands and and keep them on the landscape. Drac Twidwell started at the university in 2013 and met with the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance, and together they formed the Loess Canyons Experimental Landscape. And so we've been able to do a series of experiments and study what they do on the landscape since that experimental landscape was formed. That being said, the collaboration with conservation partners, natural resource professional goes back before that.
Yeah, and it's probably also worth saying that part of the point of this is this was the people in the place that came up with this whole thing, and it wasn't the scientists who were so smart that came in and showed them what to do. They figured out what to do, and we came in and started saying, hey, we can let us help you. So that's probably the perspective we want to come across there, and that's part of why they're so successful. Okay, so another question. This is a really good one. So talk of controlled burns came up on a UK, I assume that means in the United Kingdom, hiking group recently, and many people were worried about the damage to the animals and just couldn't understand why it would be allowed. Some people even complained that the carbon dioxide produced would be damaging. And so how on earth was it environmentally friendly thing? Your situation is slightly different, but have you had similar concerns from the public, whether locally to try to hold talks such as this to spread awareness?
TJ, I'll let you start with that one, unless you want me to.
You know, there's some concerns with like smoke, air quality related issues at times. Some of these burns, you know, the smoke will literally just hold in a valley, work its way downhill, and ends up getting to a community eventually. Is that where this question was going, Caleb? My audio cut out briefly.
Yeah, no, just to summarize it, they were asking about how environmentally friendly is it, given the fact that it could possibly kill animals and then produces carbon dioxide. Some
wildlife, especially things that aren't very mobile, can be killed. You know, snakes, small mammals, most large mammals, birds, you know, things like that get out of the way of the fire. And that always is a concern. Any of the management that we do, honestly, that's a concern with the stuff that we do. But, you know, you have to look at greater good, longer term. You know, Caleb showed that 3 million birds lost graph. If we don't do things like this, that grass is going to continue to be in a very negative direction, and we want to at least level it out. So we got to look at the greater good. I think I saw a question also alluding to erosion that kind of fits into this as well. There's actually some evidence that erosion underneath the juniper canopies is actually worse than the erosion following a burn, and it's definitely worse than erosion on slopes that have grass on them. The grass roots hold the soil much better than the tree roots do. Aside from that, you know, the carbon type stuff that's, you know, developing carbon markets, things like that. I'm not sure what impact that could have down the road in that, but that's kind of going off on a tangent. So I'll stop there, and I'm not an expert in that area anyway.
Yeah, I would just note that, I mean, from a carbon standpoint, we're talking about a fire dependent system, so would naturally burn over time. So burning and releasing that carbon is part of the natural carbon cycle. Grasslands store a lot of carbon underground that's very stable over long periods of time. So those are some of the key talking points on how this all relates to carbon and yeah, other issues like that.
Mm-hmm. And there's also been a good amount of research that's showing that, well, some of it's just coming out, I guess, by Victoria Donovan, I think is one of them, who's in this research group, that, you know, so the fact of the matter is these are pretty arid systems on the whole, and wildfire is a problem because, or it can be a problem when these get really wood infested, right? The trees go up and you can't really control it. So the fact of the matter is that by converting these back to grassland, it's kind of a safer carbon bet, because the grasses store almost all their carbon underneath the soil. And when they burn, it's not, you don't lose that much carbon, right? So I mean, there's no argument that trees do hold more carbon, but the thinking right now is, at least in grassland restoration circles, is that grasses are a safer bet because the trees store most of their carbon up top, and that will go away when a wildfire comes through. So that's kind of another answer to that question. Also, there's a recent paper by Jolly, I believe, and it seems like, I think it's the Journal of Animal Ecology or something, and they were looking at actually specifically animal mortality to fire, and they found, at least from a meta-analysis, that it's pretty low. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, maybe let's see, maybe one or two more questions and then we'll close out. So, okay, from Ellery Lassiter, thanks for a great presentation. Thank you, Ellery. What does the long-term management scheme look like for these systems? After a few years of fire, can landowners rely on other strategies like grazing, bush hogging practices, etc., or will fire management have to continue in perpetuity? What is the natural fire regime of the system?
Awesome question. Natural fire regime, about every 4 years, 4 to 7 years is a fire, historically. We did a study on re-encroachment. So after it's been encroached, prescribed fires come through, restored grassland, what happens? What we see is re-encroachment comes back faster than the initial encroachment process. So within 10 years, you're having exponential increases in canopy cover, where 10 years ago you had that eastern red cedar or the juniper woodland that you restored in the first place. So fire, it's not something that people are looking to do a one-time burn and then be able to manage it with hand tools or mechanical treatments. It's long-term fire strategy. Being able to manage these landscapes, I think I've heard the big goal is every 10 years have a recurring fire. That might be an average someday. I know places are already having fire return sooner. Others will have fire return later, but re-encroachment is going to be a major issue that's going to need to be managed, and they're going to be managing with fire.
I know there's some landowners out there that have burned some parts of their land at least 4 times since this started in early 2000s. The tough part about that really rugged landscape, with mechanical means, it's almost impossible to get to 15 to 30% of the trees on a given property. Even with fire, that rugged landscape can prevent you from getting, 15% of the trees. So we're struggling to get rid of that seed source. That's something we're going to start trying to focus on more, is getting rid of the seed source. In some parts of their state where there's flatter or rolling hills, grasslands, we actually think we can, possibly get to a point where we do an initial treatment, either mechanical or fire, follow it up in 4 or 5 years with fire, and maybe they're going to be in pretty good shape for a while after that.
Great. Okay, I've been given the cue that we're supposed to start wrapping up. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I will save the questions in the chat. I will figure out how to do that. And yeah, we really appreciate it.
So thanks. Yeah, we did overrun slightly, but I hope all the questions that came in, the discussions that happened during this very quick 56 minutes was valuable for everyone who joined us today. And I thank everyone for joining. Thank Caleb and TJ and Dillon as well for this wonderful discussion. And just wanted to let everyone know that our next AER Live will be in 2 weeks' time with Dr. Linda Hirons, who will explore how co-production can be effective in developing weather and climate services that affect multiple disciplines across agriculture to disaster management. If you haven't already, you can register for this workshop now by visiting our website. And Linda's workshop in 2 weeks is actually a taster of what's to come at next month's joint symposium, Climate Science for Ecological Forecasting. This highly interactive event will bring together ecologists and climate scientists from around the world with plenty of opportunities for networking, discussion, and idea generation to better inform the future of our planet. Registration closes on Friday, the 22nd of April, and you can visit bit.ly/clim4eco for all the details. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today, and I hope to see you all at our next AER Live, again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you. Goodbye.